welcome to Bookstackers. I'm Paige.
I'm Elise.
And we are here today to do our in-depth discussion for The Raven Boys. So we've just done our spoiler review, which is already up, and now we've got the discussion. So spoilers in this one, if you didn't work it out. Don't just read the blurb.
This book is about Blue Sergeant. She's wonderful. She meets the Raven Boys, Adam Parrish, Richard Campbell Gansey III, Ronan Lynch. Oh, and Noah Zerny.
You forgot
Zerny?
Noah?
I know, I'm sorry.
It starts off, obviously, with Blue, and she's with her family, and then she has this prophecy that she'll kiss her true love and that they will die after she kisses them. But obviously it's like non-specific because it's, you know, a prophecy. And then she ends up meeting this guy, Gansey, who she ended up actually seeing when she was taking down the list of the dead at the beginning with her aunt. From there, their friendship kind of grows with the whole group of Aglionby boys, and there's a bit of romance between her and Adam and all that sort of jazz. And then the climax is when basically Welk and Neve sort of
Barrington Welk,
Barrington Welk.
Best
basically try and stop them when they're finally doing this ritual to talk to Glendower or to see Glendower.
Yeah, they want the power from the ley line. Ley lines have a lot to do with it, with the journey, because they believe Glendower's buried on a ley line.
There's all these reveals that happen towards the end that they set up very well at the beginning, and at first you're like, what? Why are we calling him Smudgy?
Yeah, look, I mean, to be fair, his first line is, I've been dead for 7 years, so...
Yeah, he wasn't subtle. It's just
No.
we were like, lol, sarcastic.
Yeah,
So
like Gansey's
funny.
just there like, classic Noah. I like the writing style. There's a lot of dry humour, and it's very straightforward. But there was something I liked about how she wrote the characters, because you don't learn a lot about the characters when it's the point of view. When you're in Blue's point of view, you learn, like, basic stuff about her, because she's talking about how she's in a family full of psychics, and her, like, true love's kiss will kill her true love, which is a bit awkward. But when we get to Gansey's point of view, what we learn about him is mostly from the setting that he's in. Like, he's searching through his Camaro, and he opens the glove box, and there's an EpiPen and, like, a packet of jerky, and he's like, maybe it was there when I bought the car. So, you know, he doesn't, like, care a huge amount. She sets up the environment in a way that tells us about the characters, because when Gansey calls Ronan, for example, we learn through Gansey's thoughts about Ronan, like how Ronan acts, or, like, little specific things, you know? Because Gansey is, like, best friends with Ronan.
They're bros.
They are bros. And then Adam comes in, and Gansey, he does think a lot about Adam's background, because Adam's helping with the car, and Gansey is thinking, like, oh, he tries to hide his roots a lot, but they come through in, like, the simplest things. And I thought it was interesting how she does that.
I found it really interesting, the third person style as well, and I think that really worked with the book, just because there are so many different characters that if we were switching from first person from one person, first person to another person, I feel like you would miss stuff. And like you said, I think it helps with setting up what other people are doing from Blue's perspective. You know, when she catches the boys doing certain things and it's kind of third person, or, you know, in the middle of the chapter it can kind of jump into what a bit about Adam that you wouldn't know, like Blue wouldn't know that if it was first person. So I think the third person really helps. And it was interesting because I don't usually like third person. I very much like the first person sort of style, but I think it really helped as well to feel that sort of detachment as well, to kind of be overlooking all the characters. Like, you definitely felt for them, but it had that sort of eerie detachment, like you were looking through a window at them.
Yeah.
I also loved how she didn't shy away from characters' struggles. Like, it was super matter of fact. Like, when they found out that Noah was dead, it's just sort of, like, just there. And it's over, like, 2 or 3 sentences, and then it moves on.
Except for this one moment when they find where Noah's body is buried. They find, like, the site of his murder. And they sort of discover how it happened, because Noah, as a ghost, gets sort of, like, stuck in the energy of the Caveswater forest, and he starts, like, reliving the moment of his death over and over and, like, acting it out. And the way she describes it is so matter of fact, but also, like, really visceral, because she's like, he was falling to the ground, like he was being beaten, and I was, like, horrified.
Yeah.
I was like, this is terrible. Because you imagine Noah, he's, like, 17, and being attacked by his best friend, being, like, hit over the face with a skateboard. It's really crazy.
It's very visceral. I think that's one of the things, because it's so matter of fact, she's able to do that really vivid.
Yeah.
Like, this is what happened. And when something as kind of horrific as that happens, you can kind of be like, wow, because she will just describe it. And it's not flowery. It's not like, you know, the blood was leaking down into the cracks and it flowed away. And it was like, no, he's being beaten over the head with a skateboard and he's falling to the ground and there's like weird angles.
I feel like she described him like seizing or something at some point when he'd like fallen and he was like, Like, it was, to read it was really kind of confronting because you're like, oh, this is what's happening.
And I love that the themes of this book it really focuses on like friendship and the breaking of friendship and family, and it looks at fate and, you know, free will, and it looks at all those sorts of things as well as like morality and class and society. So it's got a lot of nuances as well, which I think means that this is a book that you can kind of reread over a lot of times and still get something new out of it each time. This one kind of has a lot to go into it, and especially because it sets up for the rest of the series.
You like notice things that they set up early on for later in the series, and it's really interesting when you like get to it.
It's like putting together puzzle pieces, so the whole time you don't realize that you're collecting all these clues, and at some times you're like really confused, you're like, what is happening? And then everything falls into place later and you just go,
just like, oh, that's what that little line was about.
If we talk about the characters, I especially loved how each character had their own struggles and issues and how it was really intertwined with their family and family pressures or lack thereof.
Yeah. So with Blue, we know that she comes from like a big family, just all women. That's how she grew up. She didn't grow up with like a father figure or anything. And that impacted her like greatly. Like, she is so independent, and she's described as sensible like frequently by her mom, right? And she grew up in a house that didn't really have a lot of money, right? And there's just people everywhere all the time and it's so busy, but she grew up loved by so many people, right? And then you see Adam, who comes from the opposite end of the spectrum, not so much in terms of money because he's absolutely poor, but his family is not full of love.
No.
I feel like there was a point where Adam said, you grew up poor with money, I grew up poor in love. Something like that.
Yeah, I found it really interesting as well how they dealt with Adam's abuse. Like, even though he had, in a way, gotten away from his abuser, he still had that, like, string that was drawn to them and still, like, kept being pulled backwards and kept being like, I'm, like, connected to them, I can't change. And you really saw that in the way that he responded to different events, and when his friends tried to help him, he really didn't want that help. He wanted to be independent, but it was so interesting because when he was given that independence, he didn't know what to do with it. He would default back, and I think that's something that a lot of abuse victims deal with, is that whole thing of, I'm not good enough because like you abused me and this sort of stuff. And so it's like, it was really interesting seeing that even though consciously he really wanted to fight that, subconsciously he like wasn't able to.
I think a lot of it in his character was to do with the fact that he wanted to do it himself. He had decided when he was young that he was going to get out of that situation and he was going to do it by himself, and he was going to organize it all by himself. Like, he'd learnt to rely on himself so much that he didn't like feel like he needed the other people's help, and he felt like he didn't deserve it. And
also I don't think he wanted to, because the last time he relied on someone, like his father or his mother, you know, relying on his mum to protect him.
Right.
Like, the fact that she was just a bystander as well, like, that was really hard to read. He's so used to people not helping him and to needing to do stuff by himself that when he's offered the help, he just won't accept it.
Like, a lot of it is to do with his pride. And I think for a while, that's why I couldn't agree with him as much as a character, because he was so prideful and I was like, just accept the help. But I understand that in that situation, well, no, I don't understand. I can't. But in that situation,
you can empathize.
You can see that, like, okay, I see where you're coming from. I understand why you don't want to do that. But it was still frustrating for me because I was like, just accept the help,
just
please,
needs to go
child.
To a psychologist. So interesting as well seeing Ronan and Declan's relationship as well.
Yeah.
Especially because Ronan with the boys was very, like, hard-shelled, but the boisterous side kind of did come out every now and again.
Yeah.
But you could see that he was, like, really hurting from what had happened, but he didn't want to show that side because he, again, wanted to have that independence.
Yeah, I think with Ronan, what interested me was his brother is only like a year older than him. And throughout the book, I thought they were older. I kept forgetting that. Because as I was like rereading it, because I was confused later on in the series, I think, I realized that it said there were 3 Lynch boys at Aglionby. And Declan was in his senior year and he was doing a political internship or something. And I was really confused because I was like, oh, he's only 18. But he's acting so much older because he's taken on all this responsibility.
It really makes you feel empathetic to Declan when you realise how young he is.
Yeah.
Because I think the whole time I was like, who's this asshole?
Right, because you're hearing about it from Ronan's perspective and from people who sympathise with Ronan far more than they do with Declan. Like, I didn't like Declan. And then I remembered how young he was and how much he'd had to take on. And I was like, he probably didn't deal with it in the right way. But he's only 18.
One of the things as well that I found really interesting about Declan's character that I think once I found that empathy was hard to kind of ignore. It was really interesting with his girlfriend, like the girlfriend that would come in and how they described it as she looked similar to the one he had last week and stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting because it was almost like while Ronan kind of shows his anger and all that sort of stuff physically and his issues are very prominent, like you can really see them on him. I think Declan's are a lot more internalized and I think he can't hold an intimate relationship, which I found super interesting to then have a look at and be like, oh, like he has intimacy issues. You can really see it in the way that he has to plan out his whole date and everything is set out in a way that makes him look good because I don't think Declan's actually that confident. It's all a show. But when it comes down to it, he can't hold that relationship because I think he is scared of that intimacy as well. Yeah. Which I found super interesting.
I didn't get that. I got the relationship between Declan and his brother.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I understood, whatever.
Yeah.
But when his girlfriend came up, I was like, I kind of like her. She's interesting as a character. But I didn't, like, really connect to the two. Because in Adam's perspective, he just keeps calling her the girlfriend. Yes. Like, capitalized and everything. And I'm like, okay, she's a girl. She's a girlfriend. I didn't, like, connect them. So I didn't, like, think that stuff through, but I agree.
It was really interesting as well, the relationship between the 3 brothers and how they put aside their kind of feuding when they went to church for their younger brother, which I found super endearing.
It was adorable. Adorable.
They kind of say in it that they don't necessarily believe, but it's the habit that they've gotten into and it's what they do.
Yeah, it's something they do as a family and they're not giving up on that tradition, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I think it says something about how much the family does mean to those 2 boys. Like, even though their relationship is quite rocky, family is still a big priority for them.
Yeah, and that's how Ronan and Blue are very similar because they are both really family oriented.
Yes.
Which you don't really see with Ronan as much because it's so much more subtle. But like I think that's why they click a bit better than you'd expect them to.
I want to talk about Welcome Noah.
Everything about reading that made me sad because Noah, right? He just wanted to hang out with who he trusted as a friend. And he was like, what are we doing? What's going on? No, weren't they working together or something? But Noah wasn't really interested. He just knew Welk was.
He was just joining along.
Yeah, he was just like, yeah, I'll help you, whatever, we're friends. And the fact that Welk, like, used him like that. So much hatred for that guy.
As well, it said so much about Welk's character. Because I think even though, obviously, when it happened, he was quite a young boy, his beliefs had already kind of been solid. And they, like, weren't changeable for him in his mind. There was no other option. And I think it was really interesting because it made the ley line that much more interesting to look at in terms of how characters viewed the ley line. It was almost like the ley line was a sort of symbol of people's most wanted desires and what they wanted most in life.
Yeah.
And then depending on what they were willing to do to get it and what they were willing to sacrifice. And it's like Gansey, as soon as it started getting dangerous, was like, oh, I don't want my friends there.
Yeah.
Like, was trying to push people away and being like, no, this is something that I want, so I will do this. You don't need to. And then his friends were like, no, we're here as a group. We're helping you. But he never asked anyone to make a sacrifice. So if we talk about symbolism of the ravens, that was really interesting.
I know that ravens are generally seen as like an omen of death, like ravens and crows. I know they're meant to be like super intelligent, like in Norse mythology, Odin talks with crows, doesn't he?
Hello.
No, not crows, ravens.
Hello,
whatever.
Raven and Shelley.
And I know in Lord of the Rings, the ravens with the dwarves, they talk and they're supposed to be very intelligent and they were used as messengers. But like those are the only connections I can think of.
Well, I did some research on Google. It's the first thing that comes up when you search raven symbolism. So I, really working hard. But it says in Greek mythology, ravens were associated with Apollo, the god of prophecy.
Oh!
Which was like super relatable. And also in some cultures, it's a symbol of life magic and of mysteries. Also, I found it really interesting, again, going back to the ley line, was how you looked at Neve and Welk, and they really wanted the power and like the reputation that would come from getting their wish. And then you look at like Gansey, and it was just curiosity.
He just wanted to know.
Like, that's all he wanted. He really wanted to know. And it was really interesting when Adam started thinking about what he would wish for and what he would want.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh.
It was really interesting because he has a ton of different motivations because he does really care about his friends. And when he saw in the tree that he killed Gansey, he was like, well, I have to wish Gansey alive. Like, I have to wish that Gansey won't die. So he was like, that is reserved as one wish that he has to use.
Yeah. But I also found it interesting how there was this slight resentment from Adam as well of his friends for having it so easy, even though he'd struggled so much. And, he knew it wasn't their choice, but he just envied the fact that it was just all given to them.
Yeah.
Especially in the symbolism of, like, the uniforms.
Yeah, where he had a bit of a frayed shoulder on his second-hand uniforms, and he was always really aware of it being there.
Even though no one else was. He said as well, no one else could tell. But he was always aware, and I felt like that was really symbolic of his life. He was always aware that he came from a poorer background.
Yeah,
even though no one else could tell necessarily.
He believed because of where he came from, he was lesser in some way. So he was like, I have to make up for it by being smarter, by working harder, by just being better than all these other boys at this school, just because they had it handed to them.
Yeah, and I think the uniform just kind of solidified that as an idea. It like wrapped it in a little bow and tied it, so that was nice. You were saying that you really like the juxtaposition between the orange Camaro and Gansey as well being this kind of like perfect boy specimen.
I just remembered the way his outfits were described. Or like his aubergine shirt or his aquamarine, wasn't it? He was
aquamarine.
Aquamarine.
That's so American.
I didn't say aquamarine.
No, I said aquamarine because of the mermaid movie.
Hey!
Aquamarine. But yeah, aquamarine.
It's aquamarine. You say aqua. I say aqua.
Aquarium.
Aquamarine.
Aqua. Yeah, aquarium. Aquamarine.
Whatever.
I was like, aquamarine? Sure.
Yeah, I appreciated how his car was just this old piece of shit. Though, I mean, Camaros are like pretty nice cars in general. And him, how he dressed with his freaking boat shoes and his stupid khaki shorts and the polo shirts.
Bless
I'm
him.
so fond of his outfits. It's ridiculous. And how he had to wear glasses. He was described in the books as being like nice to look at. Like he's a handsome guy, right?
I mean, in my head, I think just because his name was Gansey, I imagine him as like blonde and Gatsby. I like just in my head I'm like, it's Gatsby. So it was Leonardo DiCaprio but young and in weird outfits. Even though it says he's got brown hair.
I've seen a lot of like fan art of him, so I guess that's like kind of how I imagine him. It was just like such a weird thing going from like polos and khaki shorts and freaking boat shoes and sock tans. I imagine the sock tans. I don't know if they're actually mentioned in the book, to be honest. But to this like bright orange Camaro. Like it's always described as bright orange and just like glaringly obvious. For a rich person's car, glaringly obvious is usually like fine.
Yeah.
But like bright orange is such a weird color and it's so out there, and the fact that he like is just leaving it to sort of like die because it keeps breaking down. And he's like, no, it has character.
I thought that was really interesting that in Gansey's eyes it didn't need to be new to be worth something to him. It didn't need to be perfect or fancy. Like he was happy for it to be patchwork back together if it needed to be, but it just needed to work for what he needed, and it made him happy. And I thought that was really interesting because it's almost like how he picks his friends. He picked them based on how they made him happy, not necessarily because they were rich. And I thought that if Adam had maybe twigged on that, he would have been like, oh.
Yeah, because Adam spent a lot of time being mad at Gansey because Gansey sort of threw his money around without thinking. Because he, like, grew up in a family where he didn't have to worry about money. So obviously he's not going to think about throwing it away on some, like, shirts and whatever.
Yeah.
But the fact that he was like, no, leave this car as it is, with character. I don't want to spend money on it. Or I don't have to spend money on it, I suppose.
Yeah. I just loved all those nuances that you could... because it was written in third person, you could kind of step back and see all the connections between relationships, and you could see how one person perceived the relationship compared to what it actually was. I thought that was so well done. So the quotes at the beginning, let me get them.
You skipped them,
Did I? You've got one from Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote the poem or short story The Raven. So, you know. And then there's Oscar Wilde.
I think people caught that, but whatever. So the first quote is by Edgar Allan Poe, and it's, "Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before." The second one is by Oscar Wilde. "A dreamer is one who can only find his way by moonlight, and his punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of the world." So I think, on the Oscar Wilde one, because my brain has decided that's the one we're going to think about, the punishment of seeing the dawn before the rest of the world is like finding the information or where that road is leading before the rest of the world. And sometimes what you find out, like the truth or whatever, isn't necessarily what you want it to be.
I also thought it related to how each of the characters is on a different journey, and how their fates are sort of determined before them, either by their own, like, pressures or outside pressures. So, you know, you have Blue, who's been told that her true love is going to die when she kisses her, and that's something that's always playing on her in her journey. You've got Gansey, who is expected to do brilliantly because of his family and his wealth and his name. You've got Adam, who really wants to do well, but, you know, where he's come from, he believes that everything is against him. And I think that quote is really interesting in that sort of way, is that they have these predetermined paths and they know what they're basically going towards, but that in itself is a curse, you know, because they don't have control over that, and it's like, where's the free will there?
I think most obviously they point towards Gansey and his dream and longing to find Glendower, just for the knowledge of whether he's out there, because he doesn't even know particularly why. He's just had this longing ever since he was brought back to life. And I think it's interesting how something that he just doesn't understand but wants to so badly that he's willing to go on this massive journey.
And I think the Edgar Allan Poe kind of encompasses that as well, the whole, like, wondering and fearing and dreaming dreams that no other mortal has ever dared to dream. It's very, like, fantastical, I guess, and I think it puts it into a context where these boys are young and they've obviously still got all these other pressures around them, but this is like the biggest thing in their life right now, and it is scary because there's points where it's very life-threatening. And so I think for them, like, obviously they want this dream and there's all this wondering of, like, what could it be, what are these good things, but there's also this, like, ominous feeling that I think is there the whole time, and you're like, shit. Especially when you find out that Noah has died for this cause, and it wasn't even by choice. It's scary to be like, you look into the darkness, it's almost like, you know, you look into a future of possibilities that is unknown to you and you don't know what to expect, and yet you still dream about it and you still want to go forward.
Yeah, I think the moment where they discover Noah's body is when they're suddenly like, oh, this is more serious than just like a passing thing. It kind of chasing after this Welsh king, you know? And then when they're confronting Neve in the forest, when Adam sacrifices himself, they're all like, oh, this affects somebody we know who is still alive. And
it was really interesting, the tonal shift that happened in Adam afterwards. Everyone was suddenly just a lot more wary of him, and it was like, ooh. And it just, as a reader, made it feel like Adam was something else now.
Yeah, because he gave himself up to be Cabeswater's eyes. Cabeswater's eyes and hands? Was that it?
I think so. It was like a vessel.
Yeah, like a vessel for Cabeswater. And that means that he has a part of this, like, magical thing in him now. And because they don't fully understand the forest, they didn't, like, fully understand what he was giving up either.
It was really interesting as well, seeing each of the characters and what they saw, and how Blue saw her kissing Gansey and Adam there seeing himself kill Gansey and that kind of being his choice, and yeah, seeing Gansey as well. What he saw was seeing Glendower alive and knowing, oh, I can find him, I'm going to see him. And just the shifts that changed in each of them. I think for Gansey, it was such a good thing. For Blue, it was such a conflicting thing because she's with Adam at that point.
Yeah, she had decided at that point, she was like, no, fate, fuck you, I choose this one. She was so determined not to like fall in love with him because she was like, no, I don't want to kill him. Yeah. And I want to be able to choose who I fall in love with.
And also because she's seen his spirit on death road as well.
She knows that he is going to die.
I think that it was really interesting because suddenly it was again like her free will had been taken away from her. And so that was really interesting, kind of seeing that sort of, I guess, loss that you sort of saw her dealing with afterwards.
Yeah.
She felt that loss.
She suddenly was like, I've chosen this one, but fate has told me, like, I know that he's going to die. And this vision has told me that I'm going to be kissing him soon. So she's like, well, I'm going to be the one killing him. So she's determined to not do that.
So what were your overall thoughts?
My overall thoughts were, I really enjoyed it because the characters, and then once you get further in, you get this like eerie feeling, and I enjoyed learning about the lore behind the search for Glendower, and how like fucking intense Gansey is about it. He's like, have you heard about the Welsh King, Glendower?
Let me tell you these top 10 facts.
Yeah. Like, I was interested in all the characters, and I wanted to know more, which is why I kept reading the series.
Yeah, I really like the eerie feeling that it had throughout the whole book, and how, because it was there the entire time, you forgot about it and, like, didn't notice it until it was pointed out again. That was really interesting, and not something that I've experienced in another book, at least that I can remember. But the story was quite intense, and it's a lot to keep track of as well, because there's so many different characters. Each member of the character's family also has their moments, and the relationships there are really focused on. They're not just brushed over. And so there's a lot to keep track of with people's torments and what they want and who's on whose side, and the relationships are constantly shifting with each event. And so I think that's really intense in a book. You do need to focus on this book. It's not like a lighthearted, oh, I'll read this for like 5 minutes and then I can just put it away or something like that. Like, you need to be actually focusing, especially with all the lore and information that Gansey's constantly telling you. It all comes back into play, and so if you miss something, you're like, wait, you have to like flick back and go, oh right.
I have an issue where sometimes I start reading too quickly, and then because I'm like getting really into it, and then I like finish a couple pages later and they mention something and I'm like, when did that happen?
It's a hard book to speed read. Like,
yes,
you do need to kind of focus. And there were a few times where I would read a paragraph and be like, wait, what? And I'd have to go back and read and be like, what are they talking about? Just because they're introducing so many new ideas. And so I think that was one of the struggles I had with reading the book. But I did overall, I quite liked it. Yeah. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars.
3 out of 5 stars. I give it 4.5 because I enjoy characters.
There we go. And we already did our...
Wait, no, not stars. Sorry. Bird boys. Thank you.
3 out of 5 bird boys.
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5 bird boys from me. When I continue the discussion, just put your comments in the comment section. It's pretty obvious.
Where you should comment.
Comment down below. Basically, we'll be going through there and replying and responding to stuff. We'd love to have more discussions and know what your opinions were on the book.
If you want us to clarify anything because we might have skipped over something you thought was great, or we just weren't really clear in what we were saying, then absolutely.
Yeah. And always love a good discussion. That's all we have for today. So, hope you enjoyed. And if you watched our spoiler-free review as well, and that was the reason you actually ended up reading The Raven Boys and then watched this, tell us, what did that do to your life?
How affected were you by reading this book?
I felt. Our Instagram. Follow it.
Do it.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
That's all we have for today. So we'll see you next time.
Whenever that may be.
Yeah.
Bye.